When my son stopped calling me Mom, I didn't realize it right away. It happened slowly, so quietly that I almost missed it. At first, it was small things, shorter phone calls, fewer visits, his voice a little more distant. Then one day, he said it, "Mrs. Malik, could you please hand me the cup?" Mrs. Malik. Not Mom. Not Amy. Mrs. Malik. That moment stayed with me longer than I care to admit. I smiled at him like it didn't hurt, but inside, something cracked, a quiet, invisible line that separated us in ways words never could. I still remember the warmth of his small hand when he was a child, how he used to cling to my dupatta when he was afraid of the dark. He'd say, "Mom, don't leave yet. Just stay till I fall asleep." And I'd sit there, humming softly, watching his little chest rise and fall, thinking that no matter how much the world changed, my son would always need me. But I was wrong. Time has a way of teaching mothers that love is not always returned the way it's given. We were never a rich family, but our home was filled with warmth. I was a schoolteacher, and my husband worked long hours at a printing press. Our life was simple, tea shared in the evenings, laughter over the smallest things, a tiny garden that bloomed just enough to keep my heart full. My son, Imran, was our pride. Bright, polite, and full of dreams. He wanted to study business, and I did everything I could to help him get there, extra shifts, saving every penny, even selling my jewelry once when his college fees were due. He never knew that part. I never told him. Because mothers don't count what they give, they just give. When he got his first job, I was the happiest person on earth. I remember making his favorite biryani that evening. The house smelled of spices and celebration. He walked in holding his offer letter, and I hugged him so tightly that he laughed, saying, "Mom, you're crushing me." I told him, "I'm just holding on to the boy who made me proud." And I meant it. That night as I watched him eat, I thought, this is it. This is the reward for every sleepless night, every worry, every prayer whispered into my pillow. I didn't know then that life had other plans. It started with his marriage. He met a girl through work, Sana. Pretty, smart, and confident. When he brought her home to meet us, I could see how much he adored her. She was polite, respectful, at first. She called me auntie, and I didn't mind. She said she wanted to learn my biryani recipe, and I smiled. But there was something in her eyes, a certain distance, a quiet judgment, like she was already measuring the space she'd occupy in my son's world. Still, I accepted her wholeheartedly. Because that's what mothers do. We open our hearts and make room for the people our children love. The wedding was beautiful, full of laughter and promises. When I watched Imran hold her hand during the vows, I felt my chest tighten, pride and fear mixed together. It's strange how happiness and sadness can live in the same heart. After they married, they moved to the city, about 2 hours away. At first, he called every day. We talked about work, food, how he was settling in. He even asked me for advice on how to make lentils softer when cooking. Then, the calls became less frequent. Once a day became once a week. Then sometimes he'd miss even that. I told myself he was busy. That's what mothers always say, don't we? He must be tired. He has a family now. I convinced myself not to worry. But the silence grew louder. I remember one Sunday morning when I decided to call him. It had been 3 weeks since I last heard his voice. When he picked up, I could hear Sana in the background. "Hi, Mum," he said, distracted. "We're just heading out. Can I call you later?" I said, "Of course, Beta. Just wanted to hear your voice." He said, "Yeah, sure, talk soon." He never called back. That day, I sat with my tea and stared at the family photo on the shelf, the one from his graduation day. His arm around me, both of us smiling like the world belonged to us. It felt like looking at strangers. Months passed. I stopped expecting his calls. Instead, I found small ways to fill my days. Tending the garden, reading old letters, volunteering at the school library. But no matter how busy I kept myself, the ache stayed. Sometimes, when the phone rang, my heart would skip. Maybe it's him, I'd think. But it was always someone else. A neighbor, an old colleague, a telemarketer. I began to realize that motherhood doesn't end when your child grows up, but sometimes the relationship does. And that realization, it hurts in a way words can't describe. The first time I saw him after months was during Eid. He came with Sanaa, both of them looking polished and distant. I cooked everything he loved, kebabs, paleo, sheer kurma. But the warmth was missing. The laughter that once filled our small house was replaced by polite conversation. Sanaa barely spoke, scrolling through her phone. When they left, she hugged me lightly and said, "You should come visit us sometime." But I could hear in her tone that she didn't mean it. As they drove away, I stood by the gate, waving like I always did when he was a boy. Only this time, he didn't look back. That night, I couldn't sleep. The silence of the house felt heavier than ever. Every corner held a memory. His laughter, his footsteps, the sound of him asking, "Mom, where's my lunchbox?" I sat by the window until dawn, watching the first light touch the garden. And that's when it hit me, I wasn't angry. I wasn't even heartbroken anymore. Just empty. Empty in a way that made me see myself differently. Maybe I had loved him so much that I forgot to love myself. Maybe I had spent so many years being mom that I didn't know who I was without that name. I realized I had tied my entire identity to someone else's affection. And when that affection faded, I faded too. That morning, I made myself a promise. I wouldn't beg for love that no longer wanted to stay. If my son had chosen to move on, I would let him. Not out of pride, but out of peace. Because sometimes, letting go is the kindest thing you can do, for both your child and yourself. I started small. I packed away some of his old things, not out of anger, but to make room for something new. I called my friend Shazia, who lived alone too, and we began meeting every Thursday for tea. We talked, laughed, shared stories about our children, our disappointments, our hopes. For the first time in years, I felt seen, not as someone's mother, but as me. Still, there were days when I missed him so much it hurt to breathe. I'd look at my phone, his name still saved under "My Son Red Heart," and wonder if he ever thought of me. Sometimes I'd draft a message, "How are you?" then delete it before sending. I didn't want to seem desperate. That's the thing about love. It never truly disappears. It just learns to live quietly inside you. And mine was learning to be quiet. As the months passed, I grew stronger. The house no longer felt like a graveyard of memories. It became mine again, peaceful, calm, filled with new life. But deep inside, a part of me still waited. Not for his apology, not for his return, but for a moment of understanding. A moment where he'd realize what he had lost. And that moment was closer than I knew. It was a Sunday morning when I decided to call him again. I had been folding laundry, the house quiet except for the ticking clock on the wall. The kind of silence that feels too heavy. I picked up the phone and stared at his name on the screen for a long time before pressing call. It rang once, twice, then went to voicemail. I hung up, pretending it didn't matter. I told myself he was busy, that maybe they were out. But that small sound of the call ending, it echoed in my chest like a door quietly closing. I tried to distract myself, watering the plants in the yard. But every few minutes, I'd glance at the phone again, hoping for a missed call, a message, something. There was nothing. The following week, I heard from a neighbor that Imran and Sanaa had bought a new apartment in the city. My heart sank, not because they moved, but because I hadn't even known. I hadn't been told. That evening, I sat at the dinner table, my food untouched. I thought about how once he used to tell me everything, what he ate, where he went, who he met. Now, I was learning about his life from others. Later that night, I opened the drawer in my room and found his old school report cards. They smelled faintly of ink and dust. Each one had my handwriting at the top, "Proud of you, my son." I traced the words with my finger, feeling tears blur my vision. Somewhere along the way, that little boy had disappeared. And I wasn't sure if he would ever come back. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months. Life went on quietly. I taught at school, came home, made tea, and filled my evenings with books and prayers. But every now and then, the loneliness would creep back in, uninvited and sharp. Then one afternoon, my phone rang. It was Imran. My heart leapt. "Hello, Beta," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Hi, Mum," he replied. "Listen, We're coming to visit next weekend. Sanaa's parents will join us too. Hope that's okay. Of course, I said. I'll make lunch. What would you like me to cook? Anything simple, he said quickly. Sanaa doesn't like too much spice. I smiled faintly. All right, I'll keep it light. For the rest of the week, I felt a strange mix of excitement and nervousness. I cleaned every corner of the house, changed the curtains, even bought fresh flowers for the living room. It felt good to prepare for something again, to have a reason to make the house come alive. The day they arrived, I stood at the gate waiting. When the car stopped, Sanaa stepped out first, dressed beautifully. Imran followed, looking tired but polite. Assalamu alaikum, Mum, he said, hugging me briefly. Walaikum assalam, I whispered. His embrace felt different, formal, like greeting a distant relative. Inside, I served lunch. Everyone ate quietly. Sanaa's parents complimented the food, but Sanaa barely touched her plate. She kept glancing at her husband, whispering small comments. I noticed, but said nothing. After lunch, they sat in the living room, talking about their apartment, their plans, their new furniture. I listened, smiling occasionally, though I felt like an outsider in my own home. Then Sanaa turned to me and said, Auntie, you should come visit us sometime, but the apartment is small, so maybe just for a day or two. Her tone wasn't rude, but it carried something else, a boundary. A line drawn gently, but firmly. I nodded, pretending not to notice. That's sweet of you, dear. When they left that evening, I stood at the doorway again, waving like I always did. Imran didn't look back this time either. The next day, I sat alone at breakfast, the dishes from the visit still unwashed. I looked around the quiet room and whispered to myself, maybe this is what love looks like when it grows up, it forgets where it came from. The following months were even quieter. His calls became shorter. Sometimes, Sanaa answered instead. He's busy, Auntie, she would say politely. I'll tell him you called. She never did. One evening, I received an invitation in the mail. A printed card. It was for a dinner party celebrating Imran's new business launch. I smiled proudly, but my eyes stung. He hadn't told me himself. I bought a small gift, a pen set engraved with his name, and decided to attend. I dressed carefully that evening, wearing a soft gray shawl he had once bought me for my birthday. When I arrived, the hall was full. He looked happy, surrounded by people, cameras flashing, Sanaa standing gracefully by his side. He saw me from a distance. For a moment, our eyes met. I smiled and lifted my hand slightly. He hesitated, then smiled back faintly before turning to greet another guest. I stood there for a while, holding the gift. Then I quietly placed it on the table with the other presents and left. No one noticed. That night, I didn't cry. I thought I would, but I didn't. I just sat in silence, realizing something important. I had been waiting for him to need me again, to call me Mom again, to remember the warmth we once shared. But maybe that chapter had ended. Maybe this was the way life teaches you that love isn't always about holding on. Sometimes, it's about stepping back and letting them grow, even if they grow away from you. The next morning, I woke up earlier than usual. The air was cold, the sky pale blue. I made a cup of tea and sat on the porch, watching the world slowly wake up. I thought about all the mothers who must be sitting like me, somewhere out there, waiting for a call, a visit, a sign that they still mattered. I felt connected to them, as if our silent hearts were part of the same story. From that day, I decided to stop waiting. Not because I didn't love him, but because I needed to love myself too. I began visiting the local women's center, helping teach basic reading and writing to widows and older women. It filled a quiet space inside me. Their stories, their laughter, their strength, it reminded me that even when life takes something away, it also gives something back. One afternoon after class, I sat with a woman named Farida. She was about my age. Over tea, she told me her son had moved abroad and barely spoke to her anymore. I listened quietly, nodding as she spoke. When she finished, I said softly, "We give them wings, Farida. We just forget that wings are meant to fly away." She smiled through her tears. "And mothers," she said, "were the sky they never see again." That night, her words stayed with me. I realized she was right. We are the sky, always there, even when unseen. But still, there was one thing I couldn't let go of completely, the hope that one day, my son might look up and remember where he came from. That small hope kept me soft, but it no longer controlled me. I could live, laugh, and breathe without the constant ache. It was still there, yes, but quieter now, like an old wound that had learned to heal in silence. Then, one unexpected day, life brought the first small turn. It wasn't dramatic, not something from a movie. It was just a simple message. It came on a rainy evening. The phone buzzed on the table. I wiped my hands on my apron and looked down at the screen. It was from Imran. "Hi Mom," it read. "Just wanted to let you know Sanaa's expecting. You'll be a grandmother soon." My hands trembled as I read the words. For a long time I just stared at them. Not because of the news, but because he had said, "Mom." After months, maybe years, he called me Mom. I felt a warmth rise in my chest, spreading through me like sunlight after a storm. I whispered a quiet thank you to God, tears finally spilling down my cheeks. I didn't reply right away. I wanted to take a moment to breathe in that word, to hold it close like something precious. That night, as I lay in bed, I smiled for the first time in a long time. It wasn't the end of the story, just another beginning. And though I didn't know what the next chapter would bring, I knew one thing for sure. Love, even when forgotten, always finds its way back home. When the nurse told me I was stable enough to leave the hospital, my first thought wasn't about my health, it was about home. I missed my garden, my kitchen, the smell of tea boiling in the morning. But when I called my son, his voice sounded distant. Cold. He said, "Mom, just rest a little longer. There's no need to rush back." Something in me sank. I knew that tone. It wasn't concern, it was guilt. A week later, I came home. Or at least, I tried to. The gate was locked, and a strange car sat in the driveway. My heart raced as I knocked. A woman I didn't know opened the door. Behind her, my son stood frozen. "I was going to tell you," he stammered. My eyes darted around. The furniture was gone, my photographs replaced, the walls freshly painted. "Where's my house?" I whispered. He couldn't look at me. "It's not yours anymore," his wife said flatly. "We sold it." I felt my legs weaken. My house. The home my late husband and I built brick by brick. Sold, while I was lying in a hospital bed. My son didn't even try to defend himself. He just stood there, staring at the floor. That night, I slept at a neighbor's house. Every corner of my mind replayed his words, her tone, that door closing in my face. But life has a strange way of balancing things. A few weeks later, I received a letter, an old land document my husband had kept hidden. Turns out, the land beneath the house was still in my name. They might have sold the walls, but not the ground they stood on. My son learned that truth the hard way when the new owners came knocking, asking for refunds and legal answers. I didn't seek revenge. I didn't have to. Sometimes, betrayal carries its own punishment. I just packed my few things and left quietly, but with peace in my heart. Because some homes aren't made of bricks, they're made of memories. And no one can sell those.